Hello, welcome to this week's 8.9 News discussion. I'm ffinlo Costain. The Scottish Government has introduced an ambitious bill which aims to establish a legal framework that will allow it to support agriculture, rural communities and the rural economy in the wake of the UK's departure from the European Union. In other words, this legislation sets the stage for Scotland's replacement to the Common Agricultural Policy. To discuss the Agriculture and Rural Communities Scotland Bill, I'm joined by Nikki Yoxall, a regenerative beef farmer, a board member of Nature Scot and a member of Scotland's Agriculture Reform Implementation Oversight Board, by Andrew Connon, a sheep and beef farmer and Vice President of the National Farmers Union Scotland, and by Denise Walton, a mixed farmer who's organic and pasture for life certified and is the chair of the Nature Friendly Farming Network in Scotland. Welcome all. The Scottish Government's vision is to deliver the adoption and use of sustainable regenerative agriculture practices, the production of high quality food, an on-farm nature restoration and climate mitigation and adaptation strategy, and thriving rural communities. Nikki, do you feel confident that this bill will deliver the Scottish Government's objectives?
Yeah, thanks, ffinlo. I think it's a really important step in that process. I think we need to remember that this is a framework legislation, so this doesn't deliver on a lot of the detail that we're going to need. So I think that in terms of the process that needs to happen in order to get us to a point where the policy development can happen, that will fill out that detail, that will give us the kind of methods through which the Scottish Government will achieve its objectives, then yes, it's an important point. It isn't the only thing that needs to happen to make that progress enabled. So I think that, yeah, it's good to see some of the aspects of the bill coming out and some of the clarity over issues around defining regenerative agriculture, for example. And I think that's going to be a really important step as we go forward. But yeah, as a part of the process, I think that it's a key step, and I'm really glad to see it's happened.
Andrew, is NFUS pleased to see this bill?
Certainly, ffinlo. Yeah, we're as a union, we're pleased to see the bill out. However, we've been pushing, for many months, if not years, to get some clarity on the direction going forward. As been said before, there's it's time to deliver and see some real meaningful actions going forward. There's no detail, as has been mentioned by Nikki there. Secondary legislation will give us that detail. But Scotland's farmers and crofters need certainty. They need a positive direction of travel going forward. There's massive investments made by our industry, big capital investments. And to do that, we need to have a certainty as to where the future is going. We need to ensure the bill will give us the powers to deliver on a new agricultural policy that will see profitable and sustainable agriculture front and centre of Scottish Government policy, which in turn will deliver on biodiversity, nature and climate challenges.
Now, you mentioned, Andrew, there that farmers were essentially crying out for some guidance and for this legislation because it's been so long coming. Why has it taken so long, do you think? It's several, what is it, 6-7 years almost since Britain took the decision to leave the European Union. Why has it taken so long to get to this stage?
You're right in saying it's taken a long time. And, back in June 2021, NFU Scotland highlighted our ambitions going forward and a bit of a route map ourselves. I think it's taken so long because for many years through the being part of the EU directed and gave the direction of travel as regards agricultural support. And all of a sudden you've got governments in the UK thinking, where are we here? Where do we start? And I think that has caused confusion for them, and they're finding it a lot bigger a challenge than they expected.
Thank you. Denise, do you think that the bill gets the balance right between farming and nature?
Yes, thank you, ffinlo. Yeah, I think it really does set the pace really smartly on farming with nature, which is to be welcomed. Obviously, it's a framework bill, but and its headline definition is farming with nature. So yes, I think it does get the balance in what is published. Obviously, we need to see the detail. But what's also important is actually it's inviting us as farmers to take part in the co-development and the co-design, obviously the co-delivery of farming with nature. But what's really important is that whenever the government have discussed bringing nature frontline in terms of the bill, they've always talked about profitability. So it's profitability with farming, and that's very, very important to us.
Andrew, you mentioned that this framework, that this bill is framework legislation, which is exactly what happened south of the border. Westminster, DEFRA produced framework legislation, which sounded all well and good, and then as people often say, the devil was in the detail, and people haven't been particularly happy with much of the detail as we've been going forward. Are you worried that much of the detail will be added later, and that those conversations still need to be had?
Well, I think as an industry, we've been well aware that this bill was to give enabling powers, and the detail would come later. I think, however, as an agricultural sector, as a industry, and all stakeholders involved have been actively involved throughout this process in the last couple of years, feeding information, and we have to hope that government has been listening and will embrace the guidelines and the inputs that's coming from a variety of stakeholders within Scottish agriculture, farming, crofting, to achieve, as I said before, a sustainable and profitable agriculture, which will benefit the entire rural economy.
Nikki, what is the implementation timeline here? I mean, the government is elected until 2026. How quickly will this go through, and how quickly will some of this detail that we've been talking about get added? And just following on from that, do you see any potential stumbling blocks in that process?
Yeah, so the timeline is set out online on the Scottish Rural Payments website. So the agriculture reform route map is a really important part of the website that people need to be able to go to. They need to become familiar with, and they need to understand that that's the go-to place for this information. I think the key date on there is 2025. So that 25-26 year, actually recognising that point things are going to change significantly. And a lot of work is happening now to make sure that transition does take place, and that farmers and crofters and other land managers are as informed as possible. I think there have been, you've asked about stumbling blocks. I think there have been some challenges around communication and around how it has been communicated to the agricultural sector, where to find information, what's happening, when it's happening, how they can get involved. And I think that has been taken on board. And we've seen over the summer a significant number of shows and events being attended by the rural payments team to try and engage more closely with farmers, not just about policy development, but giving that information about what's going to happen. I still have concerns that there isn't enough information out there being shared through enough channels to really make it clear what's going to happen when you look online at the agriculture reform route map, it does say, these things are going to be coming in these years, and these are the things that we're going to, we've got a very clear indication of some of those changes already, although the detail hasn't been fully made clear and hasn't been shared, and in some cases hasn't been designed yet. But I think it's really important that farmers, crofters and land managers in Scotland understand that there is information available, and that's the kind of date they need to keep in mind, 2025. Between now and then is when all of that detail gets fleshed out, and there'll be various processes for further engagement. And I know that Rural Payments are currently inviting farmers to identify, and crofters, if that's something they want to be involved in, and they can take part in some of that kind of broader participatory consultation process.
Thank you, Denise. Funding is obviously critical in terms of delivering this. And again, it's been an issue that's caused concern south of the border. Do you see adequate funding as a potential challenge here?
Absolutely. I mean, quite rightly, this is a very ambitious bill and will be expensive to deliver. It needs to have all this ambition. But though agriculture has devolved, obviously Westminster Treasury dictate the budget. So there is a lot of concern that Westminster appears to be backsliding on some of their environmental promises, which is causing us concern. And actually, I could take this opportunity to mention the consensus on food and farming, which farmers and food producers across the UK have come together to develop a consensus to actually primarily place pressure on the budgetary responsibilities of the Treasury in terms of delivering environment and climate. This is the most essential issue that is actually affecting humanity. We have got to put good budget, planned budget, absolutely frontmost in terms of delivering these sorts of ambitions. So the answer to your question is, yes, I think probably it will be a restriction, but we've got to really fight very hard to make sure that this bill is properly financed.
Thank you. And you mentioned the consensus on food and farming there. And if people want more information about that, then there is an hour-long webinar on the 8.9 TV channel with the chief executives of the Soil Association and the Nature Friendly Farming Network and the RSPB, talking about that consensus and why it's important, where it's come from. Andrew, could we get into, a bit of the nitty-gritty? How will the payment tiers work, do you think? Tier 1 and Tier 2 are direct, base level and enhanced level payments. Do you have any sense yet of what sort of conditions are likely to be attached to the base level payments?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, as regards, you said there's 4 tiers. Tier 1 and Tier 2 will do the heavy lifting. That's where the core agricultural purpose will happen. Tier 1, and within that, as a union, we're arguing that at least 80% of the funding comes into Tier 1 and 2, so we can actually, go forward with a productive agriculture. And within that 50% split is what Scottish Government would be suggesting the funding within Tier 1 and Tier 2. Tier 1 would see as being just basic cross-compliance, and that means, good management techniques, good farming techniques, and good environmental and agricultural conditions. So basically, looking after the land, ensure it's adequately farmed. Tier 2, that is where there'll be conditionality, and an idea of Tier 2 would be to put in measures with a scientific basis that will produce outcomes and actual benefits for biodiversity, nature and climate change. And examples of that could be soil health, livestock management, reduced methane, cattle feeding systems, creating nature habitats, small woodland creation, species management, and such like.
And what I'm not quite sure about is the way that these payments will be assessed. Do you get a sense that there is an element of acreage remaining, that it is a sort of a whole farm payment, or is it based on the amount? How does it work? How will it be assessed, the amount of money that people, the farmers get within that basic level?
Yeah, well, I mean, agriculture, like every sector, is going through massive change. And on that, for a start, we need at least the budget we have at the moment. But NFU Scotland have just come out this week to say that we are pushing that UK agriculture needs at least an extra £1 billion in support funding, which would create another at least 170 million for Scottish agriculture to enhance this transition going forward. So, and because through inflationary pressures and the cost of actually adapting to these techniques and farming management going forward, we need adequate funding to do that. And then as regards the measures, will be seen as a point system, and by ticking boxes and various measures, that would give access to 50% of the funding, which would be conditional over and above the base payment type payment that we have at the moment.
Nikki, do you get any sense that things like a basic carbon footprint or a sustainability footprint is going to be required? I mean, I was wondering about base level, but if base level is just essentially money that's going to all farmers so that they're able to continue farming, is that going to be a requirement for the enhanced level? Because it seems to me that government needs to have a strong baseline from which to monitor progress.
Yeah, absolutely. So currently, all farms and crofts in Scotland are able to apply for funding to support them to undertake a carbon audit, and that's been in place for a little while now, and that will continue to be in place up until 2025. And then the expectations around undertaking a carbon audit and quite whether that will be financed separately or as part of that additional payment is not quite yet clear. But we know that a carbon audit, not only is it good for farms to undertake as a baseline anyway, and it gives them a measure of progress and can help identify areas for improvement or areas of strength already, it's definitely something that Scottish Government are going to expect all farms and crofts to be undertaking in order to access payments, whether that's base or the tier 2. There is a whole farm plan being presented as something that needs to happen for the tier 1 payment, which I think we understand will look like some sort of enhanced SAF payment. So that will be some sort of, like an enhanced SAF form. So there will be an opportunity there for us to understand what that's going to look like going forward, but we still don't have that detail quite. Also things like soil testing, again, which is already available to be supported, and animal health and welfare, again, already being supported through this preparing for sustainable farming option. So these things are in place already, and it's really important that farmers and crofters take them up because it's going to give them that support and also a CPD payment to help develop their skills in preparation for these changes in the future.
But these are optional at the moment, and are you expecting that they'll become mandatory in the future?
They will definitely be they will be attached as part of the conditions for payment, for sure. I think that is inevitable going forward, and as it stands, they are optional. And they are open to anybody who has a BRN, a business reference number in Scotland. So it makes sense to make the most of using those now and getting familiar with those tools and those systems and those processes, so that they are well understood and people are familiarised with them when they inevitably come in as something that is going to be more conditional going forward. Quite how that conditionality sits against base and tier 2, that hasn't been fully made clear yet. And even on the agriculture reform programme website, it isn't clear whether they're attached to tier 1 or tier 2. There is still some discussion and debate happening around that through the policy development team.
Andrew, just briefly, tier 3 talks about elective payments. What are they?
Yeah, tier 3, a very important part of the direction of travel. And tier 3 is seen as being a tier where we'll be targeting actions to support nature restoration, innovation and the supply chain. And that could be in environmental schemes. It could be investing in stainless steel within the supply chain, so that, can add value within our agricultural sector. It could be capital grants, for example, be it slurry storage, be it water storage and such like. So tier 3 has an important part to play in this whole process going forward. It's more targeted, specific support actions.
Thank you. Denise, tier 4 is complementary support, and I assume that this means help with marketing and supply chain infrastructure, similar to what's being proposed in Wales. Now, you've set up successful farm retail ventures yourself, so how important is this particular element?
Well, marketing and supply chain infrastructure is absolutely essential. And if one of the objectives of the bill, obviously, is to sort of strengthen local rural economies, and if you have supply chain and farmers with ambitions to actually sell direct, sort of farm to fork, to strengthen local rural economies, if you don't have the infrastructure, it goes nowhere. So complementary funding through tier 4 for infrastructure and marketing is essential. And actually, from my point of view, I would almost see more cohesive food chains that are more localized and more resilient as the best result of this whole agricultural bill, because it also means that local farming, food chains and farms are involved in local economies.
Fantastic. Nikki, the bill says that it's going to deliver sustainable and regenerative agriculture, but both of these have yet to be defined. Who's going to be defining these terms?
Well, the first thing to say is that commitment for them to be defined is now clear and is in the bill. So that's a really, really good thing that we're seeing, because I think there's been a lot of call, both from National Farmers Union Scotland, but also Nature Friendly Farming Network, Pasture for Life, many other organisations that are working in the sector in Scotland have been saying, well, yes, we are all committed to improvements going forward, but we need to understand what your understanding of that is so that we know we're all on the same page. So I think it's a really good thing that now is sitting in the bill, that there is a commitment to undertake that piece of work to define. Not sure yet who's going to be doing that defining. It's highly likely that will be a commissioned piece of work. And we know that much of the work at the moment has been supported by the scientific advisory group as well. So I would imagine that they would be drafted in to kind of support that work. Much of the work, as I said, is being underpinned by the science. So I can't imagine it would be something that is kind of done lightly. It's recognised that as it sits in the vision for agriculture and in the bill, that it's a really important piece of work.
Do you think the farmers will be involved in that as well? I mean, you've mentioned science will be involved, academics will be involved, and policy people. Will there be practical people, like yourself, for example? You've been, very active in establishing really what regenerative agriculture is, so that people have a broader understanding of it. Will practitioners be involved?
I think so far we've seen a strong desire to engage people from across the sector, and whether that's in food and also in farming. So I think that it's highly likely that there will be an opportunity for involvement. We have seen where science teams have been commissioned to undertake work in preparation for some of the policy work previously that they have reached, they've got in touch with farmers, and farmers have been really key, particularly around understanding different agroecological farming practices and the impact that they have on the farm business and on the farm ecology. So we know that for example, the teams at SAC and at the James Hutton Institute have been reaching out to farmers and saying, like, this is what we think at the moment, but we really want to get that verified from a practitioner level. So we know that has been happening, and that's something that we hope to see continue.
Andrew, the NFUS press release talked about the importance of sustainable and profitable agriculture, but it didn't mention regenerative. And I wonder why not? Are you more sceptical of regenerative agriculture and its advantages?
I think sceptical could be right. I mean, we all know what sustainable and profitable means. And as I mentioned earlier, without a sustainable, profitable agriculture, then we can't deliver any of the objectives of biodiversity, climate and nature. Regenerative, Nikki mentioned as well, Scottish Government doesn't know what regenerative means. Our president is in Europe this week, and there was a meeting yesterday, and even the Europeans can't define regenerative. And so how can we go down that route without having a proper definition? And to fasten on to something without a proper definition could be too prescriptive, I think. In my mind, it's good farming practice, mixed farming as well. And we have to acknowledge, governments need to acknowledge that farmers are already adapting and trying new techniques ahead of a new policy being released. I was in the Borders this week, and and the borders are green. There's cover crops being sown everywhere with oats and legumes. They will then be either ploughed in or grazed off with sheep. So that is regenerative farming in action. And I think majority of farmers have a fair idea what regenerative farming is, but sadly governments don't really understand it. So thank you.
Denise, the bill guidance says that a code of practice will be developed on sustainable and regenerative agriculture, but it then talks about activities and methods to deliver best practice. Now, regen is about outcomes and principles rather than practices. Do you think the Scottish Government gets this at the moment?
Well, I'm not sure if getting it is the question. You need practice to get the outcomes. Mm-hmm. So in Tier 1, we've got the essential standards, we've got the whole farm plan, and these have to be undertaken in order for funding to be forthcoming to the farm businesses. So a well-founded code of practice that is well balanced based on good science, good best practice, good practical knowledge, but that is also fair, is absolutely essential. So a code of practice for all applicants for Tier 1 and Tier 2 is very important, and one that is relied on or reliable on.
Nikki, I know that you need to go in just a moment, so if you do, please feel free just to go. But a last question while you are still here. Do you think that government will be rewarding outcomes, or do you think that they will, by necessity, have to sort of fall back on rewarding inputs because these are just easier to count and account for within Treasury?
Well, we have seen a piece of work that was undertaken by Nature Scot, which was piloting outcome-based approaches in Scotland, which is looking at, how can we undertake an outcomes-based approach in terms of support for nature on farms and crofts. And that has been ongoing for a couple of years now and is still in train, as it were. It's still happening, and so we haven't seen all of the detail about how that has been received. The farmers and crofters who've been involved have been very positive about it, but it has been kind of co-aligned with also some other work around biodiversity audits and thinking about how we can best support farms to make decisions and make management decisions on their farm in an autonomous way that also allows them to align with requirements or policy. So I suppose the bottom line is we don't know. It's tricky. I think what has been interesting is seeing the clear desire for more obvious planning. So the whole farm plan that we're going to see come in at Tier 1 is developed so that farmers can take the opportunity, almost from a professional practice reflection point of view, think about and demonstrate that they are taking consideration of all of the things in their business and how they're then planning. And most farmers are doing this, but they're not formalizing it in any way. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how that is formalized and to see the development again of the detail of what does that mean for how farmers are going to be able to demonstrate either an intent to do something or an outcome. And sometimes outcomes are affected beyond their control. So you can do all you like for a particular species, but if your neighboring farms are doing the complete opposite, nature doesn't understand boundaries in the same way that we do. So there are always concerns around, what's going to happen that's outside of your control, and would you then not receive a payment even if you've put in lots of work and effort and time to try and achieve a particular outcome. So all of those things I think are up for discussion and debate. What's great is that farmers and crofters are involved in those conversations. I think we still have an opportunity to be quite ambitious about how we support farmers to demonstrate what they're doing. What we don't want to do is legislate for the worst performers. I think what's really important is that we create space within policy to enable farmers who are creative, who are wanting to test new things, who are wanting to be very progressive in their action and in their thinking, to have the space to do that, rather than having to do it despite policy frameworks, which is often the feedback that we get. The research tells us that often farmers are doing stuff despite what they're supported to do. For example, last night's Arable Farm of the Year winner at Farmers Weekly Awards, who's based in Scotland, was telling me a little while ago, actually he's in a group in one of Denise's groups that she's been running recently, was telling me about some fantastic margins that he's been putting in his arable fields, but they don't tick the box currently for ecological focus areas, but he's been doing them anyway because he recognises the benefit they bring to his farm. What we want is policy that enables farmers to make those decisions and not penalise them because actually it doesn't quite tick a box that was developed many years ago in a different framework.
Denise, the government wants to enable rural communities, wants them to thrive, and clearly good functioning food and fibre supply chains are important ways to deliver this. But do you have a sense yet of a broader sense of what the government's trying to achieve with the rural communities element?
Well, obviously it's a very dense bill. There's a lot in the detail, a lot to be developed. But I must say, I do get the sense that the ambition is that food and farming and fibre and nature delivery are all co-producers, co-designers of what we ultimately need to achieve as farmers. I mean, farmers have got the agency to make the difference, to make the change. And the ambition of this bill is to enable farmers to do that. But we know as farmers that there's many a slip twixt cup and lip. And we have to work very hard to make this bill work for the farming community and for the rural economy on the basis of everything that farmers can produce.
Now, just a final question for both of you, which is really, do you think that there are lessons that the Scottish Government could learn from the way that CAP reform has taken place south of the border, mistakes that have been made, things that the Scottish Government needs to avoid? And Denise, if I can come to you first and then go to Andrew.
There's always something to be learned from disaster. Let's look on the bright side.
Do you see it as a disaster?
No, that's a bit of an exaggeration. I think it's been extremely difficult for ambitious farmers south of the Tweed to achieve for nature in relation to the sort of the SFI and what the Westminster is delivering for English farmers. But I think what's encouraging for us up here is that the government have invited us to co-design and co-develop. So we can actually express and demonstrate our agency as responsible managers of land through this bill. And I would really encourage every single farmer to sign up, or everyone with a BRN to sign up and to take part in the invitation to co-develop this bill.
Thank you.
That's actually on the bill. The link is actually in the bill.
Okay. Andrew, are there lessons that you think that the Scottish Government should learn from the South?
Yeah, absolutely. But firstly, I think the Scottish Government at least are taking stakeholders with them in this journey. There's been massive criticism that rollout of any future support plans has been very slow, and we adhere to that. It has been far too slow. But at least hopefully we're going to go in a direction that's going to take industry with them. And we'll look to south of the border where uptake in schemes has been very poor just because the financials are not there. And Scottish Government can hopefully learn from that. Scottish Government needs uptake within agricultural industry. And by doing that, which again needs a sustainable and profitable agriculture, by getting uptake in schemes, getting farmers and crofters to buy into this, then the industry will deliver on biodiversity, climate and nature, but as well as producing good, wholesome food within our sector.
Thank you all, and thanks. That's all we really have time for. So I'd just like to mention we haven't talked about forestry, and that is something that we're going to pick up in a future discussion, because of course forestry is also supported through this bill as well. I'd like to thank Denise Walton, Andrew Connon, and Nikki Yoxall for their time and expertise this morning. That's all for now. We're back soon.